thanks to all our panelists. Now we've got roughly 25 or so minutes for the panelists to interact with one another and to respond to questions that might come in. I took like 4 pages of notes, just great themes, great specific examples. You guys were fantastic. I just can't thank you enough. I think these high level themes of dealing with sort of the technical issues is really just, scratches the surface. That's hard enough, but it's mainly social, political, economic kinds of issues. I was trying to think about how Corbin's 5 petabytes, whatever you've got now, gets sort of managed for 50 years, 100 years. Nikhil, your points about the public-private relationships, incredibly important in today's environment. And Victoria, the use of sort of not just natural language processing, but natural language, or in this case, natural media generation, poses whole new sets of problems for preservation and what we think of as the future. And Nancy, your model for what archivists and data stewards have been doing, really sets the stage for the things that we have to do here at SILS to try to prepare students for the next generation. So I'm gonna shut up and let any of you talk and comment, and then we'll see if we get some questions from the 80 or so folks out there still on this symposium.
So maybe I'll just jump in here, and I'm actually going to direct this at my fellow panelists. I mean, one of the problems I alluded to is making sure that students get brought in from as broad a range as possible, and then sort of giving them an opportunity to train and learn. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are about building educational platforms, short-term, long-term, medium-term, whatever they are, to get these folks doing this. Liz Brunk, who's a new hire here in chemistry and IBIGS and several other things, she's trying to put together this great almost maker space in the AI type environment where students could just be working together, really self-training, which is actually most of my coding background came from that sort of environment. So what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear.
I'm gonna jump in. I would love to see 2 things that I really love about MIT come together. One is let's just go into, like, let's understand the problem space as well as we can, and then go and do something with it, like figure it out, with the notion of the this digital practice table of a lot of times just by nature, it ends up, well, the students are working together over here and over here. What if they were just more open-ended opportunities to come together to just say, here's your problem statement. It would be great if those were statements about a global problem or something, because every day we see these updates at MIT about this student who spent their summer going to help water this part of like it's these stunning things that are just amazing. So if we could do that of sort of, here's the problem, here's the thing, here's some tools, what would it look like? Who knows what would come out of that kind of environment?
Well, I could say one of the things that we try to do is have a lot of interdisciplinary labs. So, of course, the humanities lab, the arts lab is not quite the same. It's more us learning how to work together across disciplines and be part of a community. And I think what you just said, Nancy, is really relevant to that too, because it's sort of lowering the temperature because there's a lot of anxiety, at least from our side of the house, about even beginning to try and do this kind of work. So, we had an AI and art competition where people just played around, but it wasn't for a grade. It was for a chance to experiment and to grow that way. But then also creating curricular opportunities to go into greater depth. We just created an undergraduate major between computer science and visual media studies, where students have to take 7 courses on each side, and then they do a project as their final thing. So it's sort of instantiating within the curriculum, for those who have an appetite to do it, a chance to go into depth in the aesthetic and historical and creative side, and with enough computation, but not assuming that you have to be always half and half, because I think that's one of the challenges that we get too, is you get a lot of dabblers. I didn't have time to get into this whole thing, but the white coat, black box phenomenon is a real danger. If you just say, well, I'm just going to do this thing. And we've seen that happen over and over again in digital humanities. And, I say this as somebody who's part of this field. Oh, I'm just going to use this data visualization tool and look at what I can infer from this. Well, actually, you can't really say that, or the digital mapping, which, I love and many of us love. It's like, well, you do know that was a construct too, or that there's all sorts of assumptions embedded within it. And you realize your questions are already being predetermined by the software, and that it was created for these other purposes, so like having that kind of understanding can help us to move forward. And I think it's a little bit harder when you hear people in the field talking about AI and saying, well, we wrote the programs, but we don't really know what it's doing either. So then it starts to be like, well, okay, it's just hopeless. The singularity is near, and I just hope that I'm not on the chopping block, and and that's it. So, how do we empower ourselves to be part of those conversations at every step of the way?
One of the things that we are trying to do at our center, and we are collaborating with the Odum Institute for Social Sciences to think about these kinds of training opportunities for students. But not more than that, I think one of the challenges in our field anyway is the capacity to deal with these kinds of issues at local government level. So there's very little capacity both for storage or maintenance and quality control and other kinds of, let alone doing complicated machine learning models and validating them and all that kind of stuff. So I think what we need to think about is capacity building across professions throughout time. I think what Nancy was talking about, continuing education efforts and other kinds of things. So I think it's important to recognize that we as a community has an obligation, not just for the students that we are training now, but the profession as a whole, and sort of think about that kind of capacity building as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really fruitful question, because sort of things like some of the barriers that get in the way are that it's really hard to get credits for things that aren't easily identifiable. So how can we use the existing rules without having to change it, to sort of say, right, you get credit for this as a interdisciplinary sometimes works or something, but that the success could be a failure, that you learn something, and how do you measure what people how their capacity grows, they're then able to do these things. But a lot of times the people with the technological expertise need real life problems to try them out on. And so it's a kind of win-win situation to bring everybody. What would an AI hack look like? And that could be really fun.
Well, the other thing, Nancy, when you were talking and thinking about the question of preservation and what gets preserved and why and how does that become a document of achievement or a failure? And, like suppose you did do something experimental that didn't work, and you wanted to put that in your CV or in your portfolio or whatever. Is there a way to show that you're part of this vanguard that is open-endedly trying to figure these things out, and have that still count for something? And to whom would it count?
Yeah, one of the things that we've been doing, so there's a certain amount you can keep bits for so long, but if we're thinking 50 and 100 years ahead, I was doing some really fun work with the Open Documentary Lab that at MIT who's getting into all of these things. They get Academy Awards, and they're these stunning people. But one of the things is that their stuff is really hard to preserve. They're so cutting edge that it's, wow, it broke all the things. So for complex digital content, could storytelling, complex structured, captured, storytelling capture the significance, because the future needs to know it's significant, and they needed to know enough about why and what it was to sort of be able to, what does, repeatability look like in the future? And sort of that would be a really, that's doable. It's not always the thing, like in the future technologies, if you could press the button and show the same thing, the likelihood of it having the same impact or experience is almost nil. So how do we preserve why it's important?
Right, without predetermining why one should think that, because that's always a,
Right. It's sort of like,
yeah, it's like, well, actually, yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't that they went to 240 to 360 resolution. It was, or whatever.
Yeah, well, like read this part, and it's almost like a study group, right? Read this part, and you think about why it's significant, and then read the part about why people at the time thought.
Yeah.
Can I go to something that I kind of has been brought up, which is the black box nature of a lot of the AI algorithms, and there's been movement, and this has really been led in the biological side by this guy Trey Eidecker out at UCSD, into explainable AI, which is really basically a neural network based approach, but part of it is you're structuring it on your prior knowledge, your a priori understanding of what is going on. And obviously, in biology, when I've got a biochemical pathway, I do have a pretty good idea how it should work. And obviously these systems can still go, nope, skipped a step. But I'm curious whether or not this type of more, let's say, gray box AI has had an effect in your respective fields.
There has been, I'll start first and then we'll let other panelists jump in. There has been some push for understanding how predictions are being made and what are the impacts of these predictions on different groups in our particular domain. So the effects of these black boxes have been studied, but not necessarily what is it about those particular black boxes that are creating these effects. So for example, things like, why do, or what kinds of financial transactions lead to particular kinds of credit scores. For example, that's a black box, and that explains what kinds of mortgages you get, and therefore what kinds of neighborhoods we create and all that kind of stuff. So there has been some talk about should we think about augmenting these kinds of credit scores with other kinds of data about people's wealth and well-being and others to produce more loan products that are helpful, but except that no one is questioning how would we make these algorithm that is creating the score, and how would we validate it, and who gets to validate it, and there's no real push in that particular direction, and in part because of the control aspect of it, right? In part, it's there are three credit reporting companies control their algorithms, and they don't want to share it. So, yeah.
Sometimes,
go ahead.
I was just thinking about it's not so much the black box, but it's like, what are you putting into the black box? The paying attention to what are the training sets, or the preconditions, and that can be a way in for people who are not experts to at least say, if you're going to train on only this, you're going to get that.
Yeah.
That's why I think critical thinking being taught as part of our training of AI is so critical.
Good one. Since I was tempted to write down explainable AI, I don't know that it has had measurable impact yet in my area, but there's an example that came out of the Alpin documentary lab that referenced the Holocaust example that you talked about, Victoria, but took Noam Chomsky because he's like one of the most transparent figures. It's all of his stuff, and there's so much about him, and sort of did this sort of similar kind of thing, but interactive. But also was thinking about how do you understand real in that environment, and how do you kind of appreciate you learn from it, but when does it become not what you intended?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting to do that with a kind of public intellectual who's already out there and who's still around and who can comment on, and you can make a sort of comparison between your virtual version and the guy. Would you actually say that? Actually, I think that is a good idea for me to say that.
Yeah, he apparently loved the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's this whole idea of an extension of your brain that is very, very attractive there. So.
Yeah.
So that's actually an angle that people are using for some of this explainable machine learning or AI is to engage experts in sort of trying to explain or reverse engineer, and then come up with different sort of pathways that might then be put into sort of rational explanations for other users, and so that's sort of one strategy that that folks are using. But this is a really important issue. I'd like to say I'm old enough so that this is my third iteration of AI is going to save the world, so I'm a little skeptical, but it is truly different this time around because we have the not just the processing power, but the data that is allowing us to actually make better inferences, but they have to be validated in order for things to be adopted and for people to have faith and trust in them. And so that whole area of trust building is really essential. There's one question that came in from the audience that might be a good thing for the panel to kind of reflect upon. It's a little self-serving from my point of view in terms of trying to create curricula and sort of future things for our school. But what are the things that students should be thinking about as they begin their professional careers wherever they go in industry or government or not-for-profit or profit areas, to be prepared, and I think Corbin's point about critical thinking, I think, is of course number one. But what other things, if you were advising, your child, nephew, niece, what have you, to prepare, what would you tell them to do? Corbin.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this. And it's funny, much like your comment about this is the third time and that AI is going to save the world. And I see Matthew saying it's the eighth time it's going to destroy the world computer science has gone in general through these waves. And as one of that generation that came up in the sort of advent of the personal computer and saw the sort of up by your bootstraps effort, right? The small liberal arts college I attended, Reed College in Portland, Oregon, up until like about 3 years ago, there's never a computer science program. But there was this deep investment in having students teach each other. And I think to the query that came in, so what you just need to do is find like-minded people interested in a question you care about. That's why the Pearl Hacks hackathon here was such a great thing. I had several women in our bioinformatics group participate in that, and they made connections. And I think honestly, just do it. Find something you care about, find some like-minded people and just do it. And then worry about getting that sort of formal accreditation for it. That would be my take. So I'll shut up with that.
I'll also jump on from what you said about multiple iterations, because I would say that they should attend to the history of the technology and its use and abuse, and what were the dreams, what were the utopic and dystopic dreams, and where were they realized and not, because it gives you a sense of the underlying shape of the intellectual conversation. Of course, there'll be some new things happening too, but I think there's a lot of recurrence of those themes, and it can kind of get you thinking outside of the box, of just whatever the latest version is, and rather into the larger phenomenon.
Yeah, I think that is quite central, is to think about like what impacts does this have on society writ large, so to speak, and then we've gone through this as in multiple phases, right? But the issue really is about what kind of institutional and social changes does this technology, these data systems bring, and then how could we shape those changes, if we can at all. I think thinking about those are as important as thinking about what coding language should I master in, and what kind of data cleaning steps that I can figure out, and things like that. So
all of that stuff. I love the history of the technology stuff, because that's really, really important. And people are, as soon as someone bumps into it, they think that that's when the history started. And so really getting them to realize that there's a long trajectory, and that informs what it is and what it does and what it could do in the future, those kind of things. I think that it's real. I talk a lot lately about collaboration, but it's really important. And what if we could get people to partner from the time they start? We've had conversations, speaking of iteration, forever about, do we train archivists to be technological, or technologists to be archivists? And yes, we do. Or we have people who specialize, but we shouldn't expect either to be both. And so how do we get them to really understand these partnerships that are essential? And I think the other thing that I see long term is like, it's not to make it into like vocational, but to really think about, how do you learn? And I like what I do because I know how to understand the next generation of technology. I don't know just this technology. So there's that. But I think there's something to this. What the future trajectory could be: a researcher, it could be a teacher, it could be a manager in a place. And when it comes to the manager, that they don't forget that lifelong learning is essential, and that partnerships with universities should always occur. Like my continuing education things have to partner with academic. And before that was not possible. When I first started workshops, it was not. But they need to be able to be this bridge, because nobody can finish whatever program they're in and never need more. So how do we make that just part of what happens over time much more easily to study these problems? Because this is at least the third iteration I've experienced of AI, GIS, it's the
Okay, so well, we could continue discussion. I'm fascinated by things that each of you had to say. I hope that this has been, I hope, a bit fun for each of the panelists, and I think our audience has been engaged. Zoom meetings are weird in that the Zoom system doesn't have to go to lunch or have bio breaks or anything. And so what we did is we built in about a half an hour in which we would take sort of a break, and the humans can all go and take care of their biological needs, and getting up, walk around a bit, and if nothing else. And we'll be back at 12:30 Eastern Time for the second panel, which is made up of 4 experts who really study the nature of work and the sociological implications of technology on our lives. And so I hope you'll be able to join us again. I just want to remind you that this is sort of the beginning of a conversation. We're trying to use a simple hashtag to capture some of the things via Twitter, but there will be the website for the symposium will allow people to go in and make comments or contribute things. And that, so that we hope that over the coming months, we'll continue to build up not only sets of resources, but questions, important questions and themes that come out of these conversations. So with that, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to Zainab for setting us on course. And we'll see you all in about 30 minutes.
thank you all.
Thank you all.